Welcome to the Africa Speaking Podcast. The podcast discusses critical issues about the African continent. It is brought to you by Toyeza Communications in Nairobi. My name is Kimani Njogu. So again, welcome to Africa Speaking Podcast and the conversation on constitution making in Kenya. You've been in this journey, Willy, since the beginning. I mean, it's amazing that your whole life, from being a young person, being a student, being a lecturer, being a lawyer, an advocate of the High Court, all the way to the Supreme Court, and working with civil society, you've really spent your life and energies around helping Kenyans, realize a constitution that actually serves ordinary citizens. And there have been people who have said, if there is one moment that opened up opportunities for Kenya, it was the 2002 elections and the entry of the NAC government. Do you think that it was that transformative? Was it that transformative, that moment?
I think people have to see it as the government that brought down the Moi dictatorship.
Yes.
Okay? Because even people say that Moi did not support Uhuru at all. He felt safe with, Kibaki. But it has to be called transformative because you have a kind of dictatorship that's, it's old into almost from 63. And the resistance is the one that we use as a marker of transformation. That there was this push, and the kind of dictatorship caves in, Kibaki comes in, and of course, Kanu's sons and daughters. But it's true because NAC comes up with promises of, a new constitution. A lot of civil society guys become part of that government, whether it's Mukisa Kitui, Kiraitu Murungi, Akina Orengo, There's a group of civil society people that, join that, government. And then the comprehensive constitution process then it starts in 2003. Slows down a bit when Kijana Wamalo dies.
As vice president.
Yes, as vice president. But still, Bomas, is able to come up with a draft.
But of course, that is preceded by the Yashpal guy-led constitutional review, draft, which then now gets subjected to the Bomas conference, isn't it?
Yeah, there is it's that constitution from 98. There is a consensus that there will be, a comprehensive, constitution. Although Raila, is pushing the parliamentary route. And then the Ufungamano says, no, we want this other route. That's what Guy brought together, the civil society strategy and the parliamentary strategy. And then what happens? The Bomas draft is the one that is mutilated, In
to generate now the WACO.
Yeah, the WACO, which is rejected.
Which is rejected at the referendum.
2005 rejected and, back to, square one.
Would you then say that the idea of a mandatory referendum, which was, I think, in the Constitutional Review Act 2004, which basically says, look, the only way a new constitution will be enacted is through a referendum. Was that a radical?
It's a radical because it's the one that you see in Article 1 of the 2010 Constitution about sovereignty of the people. And that a referendum, means that Kenya as a people give themselves that constitution and for future, generations. it also reflects their participation, although you can interrogate that participation, during the constitution making processes and so forth. But the referendum obviously is for giving it final approval, in terms of the sovereignty of the people, because they have to, they have to accept it. One thing I should have said is that when you talk about the 2010 Constitution, it borrowed from very many drafts, not just the CKRC draft.
Correct.
The human rights groups did their model constitution in 1994.
The Kenya Tuitakayo.
Yes. Okay. And then there were others done by NCCK, and ordinary Kenyans also wrote, drafts and so forth.
And position papers. There were drafts and also position papers, which were then presented as positions with regard to particular issues and particular concerns.
That's right. Yeah. And that's an aspect of robust public participation as well. And so the committee of experts really had, a lot of material to go through. And because it was very conflictual, that's why they took this route of basically saying the constitution, the judiciary will sort out the conflicts
between the various sections.
Yes.
So Kenyans reject the draft that's presented to them in 2005 in a referendum. Once the constitution is rejected, we have the expurging of certain elements from government.
Yeah.
Isn't it? And by Kibaki. And then 2007, we have the violence. Does that violence kind of almost, does it accelerate the process of constitution making?
I think so. I think so. The Kofi Annan peace process, came up with those pillars. And one clearly was, a new constitution. It happened. And that's why the Kenya, the 2010 Constitution is not just a ceasefire document. It has a background of very peaceful, negotiations over decades and efforts. But I think the trigger was the violence.
So that's why we talk about the continuities.
Yes.
Yeah, the continuities. I mean, we have to always historicize, isn't it?
Yes.
We have to look at not just one element as having contributed to the process of making our constitution, but actually as a continuum.
Yeah, it's a continuum. Yeah, and the Nusumukate government, or Raila becoming prime minister, that particular government after 2007?
Yes, 2007. Yeah.
There was no way they were going to disengage the Kofi Annan, peace process, So they went back to to set up this committee of experts to finalize it.
I was talking with a very active member of civil society and a religious leader at that, and he told me that the Kofi Annan Kenya National Dialogue and Reconciliation process really stopped a revolution from taking place in Kenya. And he felt that it took us back in terms of our transformation as a country. Now, coming from a religious leader, I found that interpretation of the Kenya National Dialogue and Reconciliation process to be very radical, a very radical position to say, look, we didn't need Kofi Annan to do this mediation. This thing would have continued and therefore forced a very radical socio-economic and political change in this country. And of course, my concern with that was the possibility of degenerating into anarchy. So we got into this discussion. I don't know whether you have any reflection on that.
Yeah, unless of course the this religious leader, had what we call a vanguard waiting, because the revolutions don't just happen. Maybe what he meant was that we were going to have an uprising, And just like what we would have been comparable to the Arab Spring.
Yes.
Because there are uprisings even in Sudan. That happened because the status quo is not sustainable. But we have also looked at those, and as you say, we've seen anarchy, we've seen the mess that is there. And invariably, it's those who are organized who come to power. If you take Egypt, it's the Muslim Brotherhood and the army.
Yeah.
They fought it out.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, I don't think in 2007 there was any political leadership, whether it was the opposition itself, that would have led that revolution or that, uprising. And the uprisings, even when Raila became, declared himself the people's, president. You see, if he had brought down Jubilee, in 20, before, handshake was 2000 and was it 2018? Yeah.
It was 2018.
Yeah,
it was 2018.
Yeah.
2018, soon after the 2017 election. Yeah.
Yeah, and so the revolution for me, if you are going to have it, is to go back to links and continuities and see how we trace it back to Mau Mau, KPU, and if there was a continuation of radical political parties other than just oppositions who could easily be bought, I mean, you saw what happened to Raila's handshake with Moi, where the opposition reinforces the
absolutely, and then they are shocked.
Yeah, I think I would say all African countries can face uprisings anytime, okay? But whether you are going to have an alternative political leadership is the question. Okay, because there are some countries where the military go in as a leadership, and we know what that means.
They just start by suspending the constitution anyway. I mean,
yes, and the revolution for Kenya, I think it's the one that takes off from the Mau Mau. I mean, if we are going to talk about land and freedom and our resources, it has to be anti-imperialism and actually anti-leaders who are there who don't want that, fundamental change that we are talking about, which is even implementing the constitution, which if it was implemented, it will put us in some kind of a social democratic trajectory, where we caring about issues of education, health, and so forth. The resources are not being stolen or wasted, and so forth. We don't have that.
Absolutely. So the big win for Kenya so far, is actually the 2010 Constitution.
Yes.
And
you can say maybe that's what the good man of God foresaw. Because the 2010 Constitution is a revolution in that sense. Because I think it's Samir Amin and Rodin again, who basically talk about these continuities. Yeah. And they get to a particular moment where even if you don't call them a revolution, you can call it a small revolution, if you will, because it's a watershed. For serious continuities or struggles and resurrecting others, the way the Constitution in its preamble talks about the heroes who fought for our land and freedom. They are recognized, right? And the Constitution itself, when you look at the 2010 Constitution, has so many sides of struggle, I think we talked about the one on religion.
Yes.
And we have talked about the one on land.
Correct.
We can talk about the one on social and economic and whatever. The whole question of the right to water, foods, security, universal health care, sanitation.
And even, for me, sometimes, what I find absolutely, impressive including, those freedoms, which one could not even see in the constitution that was, preceded the current constitution. So artistic freedom, scientific freedom, academic freedom, language, our
environment.
Absolutely.
So it remains abstract, but when you look at it, it was a revolution, and we're resisting to have it implemented. People want to be traced. That's how revolutions are.
Absolutely.
Yeah, they can happen, And then the gains can be clawed back.
So as we come to the end of our discussion, because I think this is such a powerful reflection.
Yeah.
So constitutions sometimes would need to be amended.
Yeah.
Because of changing circumstances and so on.
Yes.
But there are many of us who have felt that tinkering with the Constitution of Kenya is dangerous because of the possibility of overreach in terms of the tinkering.
Yes.
Do you carry the same anxieties?
My position is whenever there is an amendment to the Constitution, I try to find out who is behind it. Okay? And as long as we don't have a leadership that is committed to implementing the pillars of that Constitution and also rescuing the weaknesses. Because we talked about land, all right? And we basically said, is there a weakness there? There is, of course, a weakness. Because why do we still continue the principle willing buyer, willing seller? Yeah, particularly when we are tracing the whole theft, to the British imperialism. So it depends on, like the BBI, when it did happen.
The Building Bridges Initiative.
Yeah, you could see very, very, very clearly that they were not focused on rescuing the weaknesses. The Constitution hadn't been implemented. For heaven's sake, you haven't even implemented Chapter 6, which allows us
integrity.
To get a leadership that can actually implement the Constitution. So you are right. You had better stay with an abstract document, but that states that we are entitled to certain rights. And it stays that way because it stays as a site for struggle, because it gives us the right to basically say, wait a minute, why should we wait for your progressive realization of economic rights when you are stealing resources, when you are wasting resources and so forth? And the transformative Constitution really is great for that purpose. We're just creating sites, or you can call them locations, you can call them terrains or bases where people can start, mobilizing. I mean, look at the gay rights thing. Okay, look at about literary freedom, which we went through with Wanuri and all that. Okay, that struggle was helped by the document.
Absolutely,
because that's where we went back and said, how can you tell a film director that they can't think?
They can't create in a particular way.
They can't create in a particular way.
And that is so technically you're telling them that the movie you created should have been created in a different way. Therefore, that stifles the imagination completely.
Yeah, and even expression. It's not supposed to be, limited.
It's almost like saying a filmmaker, don't make a film, write a novel. And yet they want to make a film.
Yeah. So for me, I oppose that tinkering because the tinkering is clawing back. Particularly when it comes from a conservative political leadership that finds the Constitution too progressive for their liking. Okay? Because they want to steal, they want to waste resources, they don't want to be accountable. So Article 10 for them is crazy. They don't believe in inclusiveness.
Article 10, the national values and principles.
Yes, because there is equality. They don't want transparent and accountability. They don't want human rights. There is a lot of stuff there that they are, very uncomfortable with. If we go by the issue of the 2/3 gender. Just that.
Okay? Which we have struggled with, and yet it is such a straightforward constitutional requirement, but they just don't want to, even when they can do it at the level of executive. Which is appointive.
You see, that's a problem, because you see, until they fulfill, the 2/3, the people like in Kamuru and others who talk of we are the 52%. Marilyn. Yeah, they are into that trench, in that terrain, fighting for women's rights because of that article. And nobody can stop them when you have a very progressive Bill of Rights like the one we have, the media is going to have their own battles. If there is going to be any problem there, soon the students will start talking about universal education. I basically say, the poor are being, and there is a value about protecting the marginalized. Okay? So women, even students from poor families.
Even indigenous languages, a minority.
And the vision is there. The struggles, continue. And they continue until you have a political leadership that believes that this country needs fundamental change. And there is a document, you can use it to give you that, legitimacy. And that's what I think, until you have that leadership that embraces the vision of the Constitution. Because the Constitution itself, when you look at some of the provisions, it's anti-imperialism in a lot of ways.
No, it's amazing because you see, you have shown the link between the Constitution and political, leadership.
Yes.
Because you have to have a political leadership that is people-centric.
Yes.
That then is able to say, look, we shall implement this Constitution in a manner that protects the people who are sovereign, and the people actually also trust that leadership to do so.
Yeah, because that trust is important. When you go to Article 1, it says the sovereign power, belongs to us.
Yes.
But we can delegate it.
Yes.
And we can withdraw it. Okay? Yeah. So what we have been doing is trying to withdraw it. People challenging MCAs and other people are not doing what they are supposed to do. So I get very fascinated with the idea of exercising sovereign power directly. Like Article 157, the one that allows we can start a private prosecution, and DP cannot withdraw it without our permission.
Yes.
The history of that was, like the Goldenberg case that we tried to prosecute privately, and the Wako came in and withdrew it and didn't prosecute. Now, under that Constitution, if you start a public interest, prosecution, criminal prosecution. And that's what the civil society should do with all these withdrawals that have taken place. They are taken back.
Take them back.
Yes. Under private prosecution. So
it's public interest litigation.
Yeah. That's the beauty of it. The beauty of it, what is missing is that political element that once somebody like Okoitmo Mutata used to go to court on public interest litigation, or Katiba Institute, LRF, and others, where you then find a political party that comes with them, okay, and actually joins as interested party. That's what.
It's interesting because quite often we talk about citizens giving their power to their representatives, but we never talk about residual power. We never talk about.
It's in the Constitution now.
Yeah, it is in the Constitution that power is not absolute.
No,
that power, the people remain with a residual power, which they can activate.
Yes, and exercise directly. Yeah, it has to be, internalized in terms of politics.
Yeah,
what it means. And one site that is important is that one of private, criminal prosecution, where you tell the state, look, we gave you this delegated power to prosecute these people so that, the money comes back, and you have refused. Then we are doing it directly.
But how do you adduce evidence?
Article 35. That's what I was telling. I was telling the Law Society of Kenya. Get the files from Nuruddin Haji. Say you want the file. As a civil society organization, you want the file so that you can actually see whether the withdrawal was merited. And I don't know whether the withdrawals are absolute or conditional. Because if they are conditional, it means they can be prosecuted even, privately. But if it's absolute, it's going to be difficult.
Yeah. And then, of course, there is the Commission for Administrative Justice, which also, which can also access on behalf of the people,
of course.
Some of that information.
For me, I think that the greatest opportunity that Kenya has to come up with an alternative political leadership is now. The opportunity basically to breathe life into these sites, of struggle. But as long as we keep on having leaders who reinforce dictatorships, and governments and so forth, the way Raila did it with
Moi, actually.
And Moi, and then...
and also with Uhuru.
When that happens, then the people should themselves be the rulers in the sense of monitoring the opposition and the government. That delegated power from the opposition should be withdrawn.
Yeah.
Okay? Because it's not monitoring anything.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
So any final reflection on this matter? Because I think we have really covered some very good ground historically. And we have gone on to
you have discussed
for instance, I have one last one, because when we talked about radical Pan-Africanism, and we talked about and we talked about the merits of radical Pan-Africanism.
Yeah.
Do you think there is a certain thrust, and African countries are still making constitutions? Tanzania, is on the way to enacting a new constitution, and there are many other countries.
Gambia was doing it, Parliament shut it down.
Yeah. So do you think there is certain thrust that African constitutions can have to entrench this radical Pan-African idea?
It's a great question because in the 21st century, we are thinking about Africa in a different way. We're thinking of African currencies. We are thinking of unity in Africa. And I think it's a great question in the sense that we've now start thinking, what the charters will look like. Is this AU charter, good enough? Because we know what the leadership is like in African Union. So I think yes, because this radical Pan-Africanism is about people to people. Then we've got to proactively think of what the institutions that will anchor, that radical Pan-Africanism will look at. And I think it's to borrow the transformative, constitutions that are there. And they start with India. India is a constitution that says in the preamble that they are going to build a socialist economy or socialist society. We can look at India, South Africa, Colombia. There are a lot in the global south that have transformative constitutions. And then, as we are saying in the case of Kenya, we look at where the weaknesses are, so that they are not repeated. In that continental and global charter that will anchor, Pan-Africanism. And I think when you look at radical Pan-Africanism, the leaders of that particular movement, whether we start with Nyerere and Nkrumah, Amilcar Cabral and Gaddafi and Sankara, there is, and even intellect.
Even NASA.
Yeah, even NASA. Yeah, because you see, these were the Bandung guys in 55. It was all these countries that later called themselves non-aligned.
Correct.
Because it's still that debate that the world should not be unipolar. We need a multipolar world where there are forces
from different directions.
Yes. And
because they provide stability.
They do, because the Cold War provided that kind of option for the
balancing of power. You end up you minimize excesses when you have singularity of sites of power.
And I think, in fact, that issue is so brilliant that I think those who are involved in reparations, those movements, Black Lives Matter, the whole question of global South transformative constitution, That's what we should think at. How do you rescue these weaknesses we are talking about? Correct. So that there are no reversals and, clawing back and so.
I think that some of the work could be, of course, in having a very progressive interpretation.
Yeah.
Because, there's a way, in my view, the constitutions could be read to celebrate beyond borders, other than being very insular in terms of the nation state, as it were, and that we reach out and also providing input beyond borders.
Yeah, when I visited Nigeria in 2015, and saw that their president, I suggested to him and the others whether Nigeria could be, as a big African country, be the one that hosts what I called, a Pan-African, Institute for Progressive Jurisprudence. Okay, so that's what Ghana decides, Nigeria, Malawi, South Africa, and whatnot. There is a coordination so that we stop relying on foreign authorities, and we pick the gems of progressive jurisprudence through those particular institutes. So they said they would think about it. Nothing happened. So at the moment we were thinking of the Caribbean, because they are really talking a lot about Pan-Africanism and the reparations and so forth. And then we can bring in that aspect of these constitutions have to be interpreted. What kind of jurisprudence? Because we have seen now how effective the judiciary is, because it has a final word on
so many issues. It counterbalances the political class, and of course going to the diaspora as a site of deeper reflection and deeper interpretation. It actually makes a lot of sense. Take for example the cases that Martha Karua has been taking to the East African Court of Justice. It's very important that the Supreme Court of Kenya doesn't become an apex court and the last word on everything. So once you go to the continental court, so you go to the East African one, and you go to that Pan-African Institute, if there is, and they critique what you are doing, and the Constitution says you can change your decision. That's how you build that jurisprudence that is African and progressive. Because once you deal with the hierarchy, of course, you can get very bad decisions. The Supreme Court can be actually a graveyard of progressive. Absolutely. Depending on who sits there. So it's good to have this notion that you are not final. There is an East African court that can critique you, the African court, and then there is one that is global, for global African, that is looking at these things and so forth. And the lawyers will quote all that, In other words, because societies themselves are always in the making, they are always seeking to improve themselves. We can find answers in the interpretations of the documents that we have, and we can make adjustments. But I think always seeking to be better than we were. One of the decisions we came up with, I think the digital migration case, we basically said that the Constitution gives a theory of its own interpretation, and it discussed the pillars and whatnot, and it's being followed in many ways. That's how judges are coming to the issue of history, economics, theology, and so forth. To deal with certain sections, the articles that are there. What does it mean that we acknowledge the supremacy of the Almighty God of all creation? Okay, it's going to be very interesting space now because the technology world is going into artificial intelligence, and I think that the judiciary must be a learning institution.
There will be artificial intelligent judges.
There should be artificial intelligence. Absolutely. Absolutely.
In fact, the Emirates are thinking of such a court in Mars in 100 years.
Thank you so much, Chief Justice Willy Mutunga. I'm so happy. It's always such a pleasure having discussions with you. It's an opportunity for learning for me, and also for us to continue, educating each other in this journey. So thank you so much.
Anytime. Yeah.
This concludes our episode in our 3-part series of this podcast about constitution making in Kenya with Chief Justice Professor Willy Mutunga, President of the Supreme Court of Kenya. Thank you for listening to the Africa Speaking Podcast. Join us in our next episode, brought to you by Twaweza Communications. My name is Kimani Njogu. For any comments and views, you can reach us through our website, www.africaspeaking.org. You can also reach us on Facebook, Twaweza Communications, or on our Twitter handle @TwawezaComs. You can also write to us on email info@africaspeaking.org.